My next show.
For the last, since we started this year, 2nd of January, we started this slot, and every Tuesday I was like, why don't we do something a bit different? Final hour of the show. Why don't we go in depth and really delve into the career, the lives? Sometimes there's controversy, there's always some gems, there's always something inspirational that comes out of these in-depth conversations. And we've done it with like a bunch of artists. You know, you can go online, One Extra YouTube channel and check them all out. But I really wanted to get this man in the building because, like, when it comes to where we're at in this UK urban culture, there you can trace back the story, you can trace it back. We've done a lot of the tracing back of it via the artists, via the music, but we haven't had anyone in the building for these in-depths that has had such an impact from the other side of the desk. Like, I'm talking about a man that worked his way up from, I'm sure you won't mind me saying this, from T-Boy all the way through the A&R ranks.
Yeah.
He is currently the president of Island Records in the UK. He is also an OBE, amongst so many other accolades. I could sit here and just spend an hour going through the accolades of the man, but we do actually want to chat to Darcus Beese.
Yes.
How are you, brother?
I am feeling a bit nervous, so look after me.
This is kind of like the opposite of what you usually do.
I mean, I'm sitting in, this is where the artist will sit.
This is where the artist, that seat is exactly where every other artist has sat.
So I'm spun at the moment, but your intro and your welcome was lovely, so thank you.
Darcus, I like to kind of start these chats, you know, from the beginning, because often people know, you know, parts about the artist, bits and bobs about their music, but with you, a lot of our listeners will have heard your name, will have heard lots of their favourite artists mentioning you. They may have seen you in a couple of pictures on Instagram. They might know a few bits and bobs, but
right.
I want people to really understand what you've done for our culture, for the scene, for so many artists along the way as well, man. So I want to kind of take it back to West London, Fulham,
all right, yeah.
where you were born and raised, man.
Yeah, West Side.
What would we have found you knocking about doing as a kid, firstly?
I was a runner, so I was Forrest Gump. I was an athlete. I was a middle distance runner, so you would have found me running round the Cinder track in Hurlingham Park in Fulham. That's where you would have found me. So that's what I was serious about in the very first instance.
What was your distance?
1500 and 800.
Oh wow! Because
and cross country.
Funnily enough, I was an athlete as a kid as well, but I was not a long distance runner at all. I did a little stint at high jump.
No. That
was about it.
Yeah, no. I had the lungs of an Ethiopian.
Wow.
So, but then music found me. Yeah. So there you go.
Was music something that was, because for a lot of people, especially when you're from, you know, Caribbean heritage, African heritage, music is often something that's just at home, just in the house, just playing on a Sunday, playing in the evening. Was that kind of your first experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, my father was from Trinidad, and so Calypso was the soundtrack at home, or soca as the youth them call it now. But reggae, Jamaica reggae, Trinidad Calypso was definitely the soundtrack at home, with a bit of Marvin Gaye sprinkled in there.
So that's like, even just from hearing like soca, reggae, Marvin Gaye, it's almost like that's a great starting point.
Yeah,
if you're going to be getting into music.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a love of music from an early age. You know, my mum and dad had a serious vinyl collection, and you know, even back then, when I was 7, 8. Going through the records, I remember Bob Marley and I remember the Island logo. So even back then, there was something going on. It's
crazy that you trace it back and you remember flicking through those vinyls and seeing that logo, and today that logo is of a company that you're the president of. Like, do you ever sit back and like take it in and think, wait a minute, like I've actually worked my way to the actual top?
When I'm in situations like this, I do. It's weird. I try not to give it any gravity because I'm in it and I'm blinkered and my head's down, and other people kind of give it importance and relevance. So I do take notice of that, and I don't take it for granted. But I don't let my ego kind of get in the way.
Nicely said, man. As always, as well. Like always have been, ever since I've known you. You've always remained like really humble. You never, because a lot of people, especially in your position, like you can't even get a 5-minute conversation with them. Like you've got to book in through a PA of a PA to a secretary. Like you're someone who's always been so personable, and you stop and talk to the artists and people in the street, and you've just kept it.
Well,
like,
I think that's how we've come up. We've known each other since I'd like to say teenagers. I don't,
I think I was just on the cusp as well.
And I was probably just ahead of the curve on you, right? But when you have a long career, which you've had as well, you see people come and go, and it is very much about relationships and stay, and keeping grounded. And because you're always one step away from oblivion, you always, as well as you have your ups, you have your downs. And when you're in a bit of in oblivion, or you're having a down, and you look to your left and you look to your right, who's there still for you? And that's why I think it's important that you maintain relationships. You maintain relationships, and you stay grounded. And when you leave a room, you don't want people throwing daggers.
And you're someone who I've never heard anyone throw daggers at.
Well, I know. Maybe you haven't spoken to the right people. But I'm always aware that if you're going to be around, you don't want to be dodging bullets all the time. You don't want negative energy around you. So, fundamentally, you want to be a good person.
Indeed, man. Now we asked you to pick out a bunch of records, which you could have picked so many records.
This was hard. This was hard.
And I saw Aswad there at the top of the list. Aswad was definitely a group that, like, on a Sunday, I'd be like vibes into a bit of Aswad while my nan was cleaning up or whatever. Mum as well, like she was right into her reggae and the Dennis Browns of the world and whatnot. When did you first come across Aswad? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, as a young man growing up, especially in Britain and in London, through the 70s and 80s, there's a bit of history repeating itself at the moment, but, as a young black man walking the street, there was blacks out daubed on the walls in white paint and the N-word out daubed on doors and stuff. And you were trying to find your place in the world, and as a young black man, what resonated with you. And like I said earlier, we grew up listening to Jamaican and Trinidadian Caribbean music, and Aswad was kind of the first band that was from the UK, and was young black men that I kind of I was West, they live South.
Yeah, it seemed like something you could relate to.
Totally relate to. And I remember, Brinsley was made a film called Babylon at the time,
a legendary
film where, again, it was the struggle of the young black youth and trying to find their place. So Aswad really resonated with me, and the title of the track, hopefully that you're going to play, Warrior Charge, was just said everything in the title.
Perfect intro. Sure you ain't done this radio thing before, Darcus?
I wish.
Like, the musicality on this as well, it just keeps going as well.
It sounds so nice.
It's just a vibe.
Nice,
if you're just checking in, Darcus Beese, who is the president of Island Records, is in the building. Legendary conversation. A man, his career spanned... What we talking career-wise? Couple of decades. And in those couple of decades, like the achievements, the signings, the impact that he's had has just been incredible. Hence why he's in the building right now, and we are getting to the bottom of this whole career. Now, we kind of spoke a bit about, early family life and growing up and being surrounded by, that soca and reggae music and whatnot. When did you start really selecting your own music? Because you get to a certain age, you're like, I can pick my own stuff to listen to now. I'm into this, and this. Like, I don't need to depend on parents or family or stuff I'm seeing and hearing on the TV. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to listen to that. What was that for you at the time?
I think there was a moment when, again, young growing up, and apart from pirate radio, LWR and all of that stuff, you were listening to Top 40. And I remember once listening to the Top 40, Top of the Pops, and a record came on by the Buffalo Girls. And that was Malcolm McLaren, and that was the first time I'd ever seen. And they showed a video, and that was the first time I'd ever seen breakdancing.
Wow!
And that was my entry point into kind of the route. Was into electro. That was my first kind of foray into independently going searching for music. And electro was the kind of sonically was the basis of what hip hop was gonna come into. So that was very much. Electro and then into hip hop via mixtapes that me and my friend were getting back from New York.
And we're talking about, like, when we say mixtapes in those days, we're talking about actual cassette
We're talking about
tapes.
cassettes, yeah, that somehow would find its way over from New York and into our hands, and DJ Red Alert and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And that was very much into hip hop culture then.
And you know, we fast forward a few years to what, 1993. I believe you was working in a hairdresser's at the time. Was you barbering?
No, you'd have to go. You barbering.
Back a bit further.
You'd have to go back a bit further. I actually started in '88. So I left school when I was 16, and that was '87. In '88, when I was 16, and then I became an apprentice in a hairdresser's. And I wasn't barbering; it was a hairdresser. It was blow dries and washing hair, and that's where I was for the next 3 years up until 88, 89, and then I got my first job in Island Records.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you remember? You know, was it a typical flicking through a newspaper? Was it how did you find out about the job? What made you want to go for it?
Well, funny enough, you know, again, listening to music, I never really knew the process. You know, you used to go to the record shop to Woolworths with your record token and buy some 7-inches. But you took for granted the process that went to get to the vinyl, right? So I never understood that. And when I was working in hairdressers, I started to meet people that worked in the music business, and I met a couple of A&R people. One A&R in particular was a black man called Lincoln Elias. And I asked him what he did, and he said, I'm an A&R person. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, I sign acts. And I said, well, you sign the bands? And he said, yeah, and then I help them make their records. And that's when I was like, oh, right, there's a process. Oh, right, so, oh, God, I want to do what you do.
Because you think most music fans, they don't take on board. Like, they pick up the music, they consume the music, they don't really stop to think, how was this actually created and made, and how did it get onto
blood,
this?
sweat and tears.
Yeah,
with blood, sweat and tears. And that's, you know, what I slowly became to realise, and it was something that I was drawn to, and I had to work in the music industry.
And so Island Records, 1990, late 80s, about to be the 90s. Island Records, you applied for that job. Did you have to? Were you sitting in an interview?
It was all about for me networking, and that once I met a couple of people in the music industry, it was about kind of going to the places that they went to, and whether that was gigs or whether that was songwriter nights or parties. It was just about being in and around all those people. And then one day I had a day off from my job. I was hairdressing, and I went to blag some records from my friend Julian Palmer, who now works over at Columbia. Who signed
Julian.
Yeah, who signed Rag and Bone Man. Big up Julian. And I went to see him to blag some records, and he told me that there was a job going in the promotions department for a promotions assistant, to politely put it. And luckily I got the job. I went for the interview and I got the job a week later. But that was, I had sent out about 30 CVs before that and got no answer. So it's about being out there and being in the mix, you know. And even today the same applies.
Most definitely. Like, networking has always been, you know, relationships, like you mentioned at the top. Relationships, I still believe, like, in my career and as I'm moving forward, relationships has always been kind of what has kept me in the game, kept me going, and keeps you relevant, keeps you, like you said, when you're going through a bad patch, who is on the left and right of you is so important, man. But hearing it coming from someone who's been there, you know, on every level of the industry, I'm sure people at home will be super excited to hear that, man.
Wicked.
So, promotions assistant, it was the official title.
Yeah.
What did that kind of entail?
Well, that entailed making lots of tea, and like today, I could make you the most amazing cup of tea that you've ever had.
Sick.
You would think you were drinking amber nectar. So yeah, my tea game was strong. Photocopying, collecting people's dry cleaning. You know, when the pluggers used to come up to Radio 1, which was in Egton House. Yeah. People couldn't park outside, so pluggers used to run the gauntlet of traffic wardens and get their cars clamped. And so I then had to come up to town on London Transport to sit in the car and get it unclamped and then drive it back to the office.
Wow.
So
that was one of your actual jobs.
That was actually one of
to drive clamped pluggers cars
back to the office.
And pluggers, for anyone who's listening, who don't really heard the term, but like radio pluggers are, you know, the people who come from the record label with the new music and come and present it to the shows and the producers and the presenters like myself and whatnot. So that was your job to actually. That's crazy.
Yeah, and then if you bring it back to Aswad, one of my first responsible jobs was to take Aswad to Hong Kong. And this is the first time I'd ever travelled, right? to take Aswad to Hong Kong to play on the Miss World,
wow,
the Miss World competition. Right?
That's not a bad first international.
That wasn't a bad first international trip, and because I had dreads at the time, everyone thought I was in the band, which was cool. But yeah, that was So it was exciting times.
Wow, Hong Kong with Aswad to play at Miss World as a first, like.
Yeah, it was random.
So it almost started legendary. Like you started off on the right, like as you meant to carry on, I guess.
Absolutely.
Hinder Hicks. I remember the name Hinder Hicks. Many people listening won't remember the name Hinder Hicks. Did Hinder end up being one of your signings?
Yeah, Hinder was one of my signings.
I guess by then you'd moved out of the promotions side of things and into A&R.
Mm-hmm. It was because I naturally would go and see all the bands play live and hang out with them. And the then MD of the company thought my talents were wasted in promotions and I should be an A&R person, and so that happened organically. And one of the first acts that I signed, because I very much wanted to sell records, and I had acts. I don't know if you remember, I had a rapper called MCD, Silent Eclipse.
Wow, I do. I actually do.
Do
I remember MCD. I forgot that was you as well.
Yeah. So I was keeping it real 100.
Yeah.
And everybody loved it. But I wanted to sell records. I was ambitious and I wanted to sell records. I cared about the culture.
Yeah.
But I was very ambitious and I knew that I needed a voice. I needed a voice that I thought that could travel outside area codes. And Hinder was that first foray into me trying to do something that crossed over. And to a certain extent, it worked.
I remember hearing Hinder Hicks and first thinking, oh my God, like, who is this? Like, because it sounded to me like another one of those American, shiny, polished R&B singers at the time, which was what was happening.
Totally. And it was to try and compete, but to do it from a kind of UK perspective.
Yeah.
And I'll be interested to see how this sounds.
Like I'm itching. My thumb is hovering over the button. I'm like, this is a great excuse.
I think this was like 98, 97, 98, and we made the record with Ital Shaw, and who was part of the jazz collective out of New York, and had just written with Maxwell, Ascension. And so we were, and also the famous now dead, rest in peace, Leon Ware, who did the incredible stuff with Marvin. So we got some real classy people to make the record, and I think we achieved.
It sounded like it, definitely.
Yeah.